Clearly we don't see that. Think about who's talking. A lot of times you might have like the CFO or the accountant person, and they've got these numbers, and the numbers say a story to them, and they want to share that story. The problem is that they have a whole history of looking at numbers and interpreting them in stories, and maybe they were up last night thinking about other scenarios where this same kind of thing happened. And so when they look at those numbers, it has all this nuance and depth, and they want you to have all that nuance and depth. But instead of telling you what they see, they say, it is obvious that. And it's like they just jump over the pond and they get surprised when you fall in and get wet, right? It's not obvious. You have to be explicit. You have to share with us how you came to this conclusion. And then you have to let us push back against it. So there's no requirement by the world that we interpret it in any particular way. Third, the shared understanding we construct together comes from us being able to put it to use. I have to do something with it. Let's say, for example, let's say you don't invest. You let your partner do that, or you let your retirement fund do that, but it's not your cup of tea. When you read the newspaper, you put the business section away, right? You're not into that world. You just hope your retirement fund's doing what it's supposed to do, that the market's in the right place when you need to draw on it. It's just not your thing. And I come in and I say, I'm going to talk with you now for the next 10 minutes about why Apple's share price has risen to the height that it has. And I start talking to you about derivatives in the marketplace and, your eyes will just start glazing over. Because you're not going to put this to use. It's not your world. And yet so often when we communicate, we talk from our point of view, not from our listener's point of view. They have to be able to do something with what we're talking about if you want it to stick. That's critical. The last thing I want to say up here on this one is that the way we understand the world influences our behavior. And this is huge. This is what makes these change initiatives I work on happen so fast. Because when people have a common way of looking at something, then they behave in a certain way. If people believe that nobody listens to them, they stop talking. If people believe that their input matters, they share what they feel. That's just one small example. So the ways that we see things, the way that we believe, our understandings of the world actually influence our behavior. Now, what does that mean in a change initiative? Well, at the World Bank, what we wanted people to share what they knew. And what happened is that when we got this common understanding of what it meant to share know-how and expertise, suddenly we had tens of thousands of people doing it on their own. You've all had that experience of building a website or a community forum and nobody uses it. We had the opposite problem. We couldn't build them fast enough. People started just pulling things hither and thither. They started having internal conversations in Yahoo. That was a problem because we had to keep them internal, right? But it was like a beehive that was just building honey faster than we could build honeycomb. That's what happens when you have a common way of understanding the world. And that's what you're looking for when you want this change to spread fast. Okay, so I've just kind of tapped. The reason I wanted to go into this, I know this is kind of heady stuff, but it's the core of everything I do. This is what I was doing intuitively when I was doing that street theater. It's a different way of understanding why it's important to pull people together. I'm going to ask you in just a minute about your own experience and your own questions, and I'll come back to the book, but I want to have some time to hear from you before I go forward. When I do, I'm going to be asking you about the kinds of communications that you're involved with now and how either they fit or don't fit this, and how could they be changed to fit this if you wanted them to. So I'm going to ask you that in just a moment. But first, I just want to say one more thing. The more important something is for you to communicate to folks, the more important it is to move into face-to-face interaction. We have technology like we've never had it before. And frankly, it works for most of the things we need to do. But when you get into a mission-critical situation, when you're having a problem, when something is tanking, or when something is so transformative that it's going to change everything, you need to look at how you're going to pull people into the same room. And this is something that a lot of people don't like. I was involved with this $20 million program in a large energy company. And part of it was just completely dying on the vine. And I said to them, you need to identify your most valuable players and you need to co-locate them. We're talking that we came up with about 60 people. And they said, we can't do that. We can't fly 60 people to one location. And my answer was, what's it worth to you? Is it worth $20 million? Because that's what you're paying for not flying them together. We brought them together and we turned the thing around. You got to ask, when you get to that place where you're in deep yogurt, right? Where it's really on the level, who are the right people and how do we get them in the same place at the same time? Because that's where the really high value interaction happens. And that's what this is about. If I were to call this anything, I would call it event management. It's about bringing people together and creating events. Sometimes it's 2 people over coffee. Sometimes it's 100 people in a room. I've done it with 10,000 people, 4,000 in a room and 6,000 through the web. But you still got to figure out how to bring people to that connection as well as possible when the stakes are really high. So let me pause for a second. I've been talking a lot. Any questions about anything that I've talked about? And then I want to know in particular about communication. Open floor. Yes? We're going to bring you a mic because we've got folks who are watching on the web, and so we need the mic so that they can hear what your questions are.
When you're talking about getting messages across in person, how do you do that? I mean, there's one thing to call a meeting with your colleagues, but it's quite another thing to try to reach people large scale with a big message like the World Bank message.
So how do you create events?
How do you do that? How do you
Right.
get, you know, this large scale kind of person to person messages going? If you're not using, you know, the internet or, you know,
right. So there's lots of different kinds of meetings that you have. There's coffees. There's meetings with 10 people in them. There's presentations to particular bodies like boards and divisions or the senior leadership team or a particular unit. And then there's large-scale town halls and gatherings. And if you really want your message to spread, what you do is you cluster all of these in a short period of time. You do all of them at once. It's how the entertainment industry works. Is this clumping. When Kenny Rogers is in Las Vegas, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Hong Kong, London, Paris, all within the same 30 days, then everybody looks around and goes, Kenny Rogers, he must be something. But when you take that same calendar and spread it over the course of a year, he just disappears into the wallpaper. So what you do in an organization is that you do your board presentation, your executive leadership team briefing, your coffees and your town halls, all in the same 30-day period. So that's kind of logistic. The next thing is that you have to make them compelling. And again, the entertainment industry is a good place to look, or marketing. Why is somebody going to go stand in line, and spend $100 to sit and listen to someone play the guitar for an hour when they can go out here on the 14th Street and do it for free over a cup of coffee? Well, the people who create that event know how to create that suction. They know how to create something that draws people to it. And we need to do the same thing in organizations. We need to ask ourselves, what makes it compelling for someone to attend? And very little energy is spent on that. It's the soft part of change, and it's the hard part. Because the soft part is that part that elicits our desire. So there's 2 industries that have done a really good job with it, the entertainment industry and marketing. And in most corporations, they take it for granted and they just say, oh, because the president wrote a note, everybody will show up. And they even might physically show up, but they can be completely checked out while they're there. And what you want is you want them involved. And you do that by creating compelling material. Sure. Someone else? Yes, great. Thanks for your question.
I'd like to hear some of your suggestions about dealing with the inherent cynicism that you get within any organization with regard to change and differentiating where one wants to get with your project versus the other change experiences that people have had that have actually made their jobs more complicated or more difficult.
Right. That's a really good question, and it's a subject of a lot of concern. The first thing I always ask is, are they right? Is my change initiative out to lunch? Am I doing something that's valuable? I know when I got called into this large energy company to implement technology, I wanted to know, what's the technology? Show it to me. Is it any good? Does it do what you say it does? Because if it doesn't, I can't get out and start making this thing happen. It will totally backfire on you, right? So there's a part of me that says, is this just another mandate from above? And if it is, then I wouldn't put myself behind it. I might execute if I have to, if I'm an employee, if I'm expected to do that, but I wouldn't throw my investment, my personal energy into it. Now, what happens when I do believe it? When I really want to go for it? How do you deal with the cynics? There are different kinds of cynics. There are people who are just worn out and beaten down because they've been through a lot of this stuff. And the best thing you can do is to demonstrate through experience what it is that you're talking about. They are skeptical for a good reason, and they need to taste it, and they need to determine for themselves that this one's for real. And so you need to give them opportunities, and sometimes many opportunities, to taste it. I have a whole section in the book on dealing with what I call toxic people. There are people who are hostile to what you're doing, who will want to take you out. There are people who are apathetic. There's a whole range of descriptors around people who will not give you buy-in, not participate. And here's what I found by working with thousands of people. 90% of those people can be won over, which is a huge statistic. And oftentimes it's even personality driven. Sometimes I get called into organizations a lot of times when they're in trouble. So I'll have a senior leader call me in and say, this initiative we're doing is costing us millions of dollars and it's going nowhere, help, And then we make a list of who are the most important people to influence. And they'll say, don't talk to this person. This person's nuts. Or this person will shoot us down at the first, or this person hates me, or whatever it is. And then I'll go talk to the person and they'll be fine. So there's some kind of personal chemistry going on, and then my job becomes, how do I create a bridge between these two people so that they can start working together? The biggest, I used to do this, by the way, when I was an employee, so I don't want to imply that you have to hire a consultant to do this. The biggest thing that you can do to win someone over who's like that is send someone to them who's truly neutral, who will listen to their story, to their point of view, will value their experience, instead of try and convert them to the initiative. That is my #1 strategy. It's a listening strategy, and actually I have a whole section in the book called Story Listening, and I tell you how I conduct story listening, what I listen for, and how I build trust and rapport when I'm doing that. So I listen, and I find that I can convert 90% of the folks. So there's still 10% that you can't. And then you have to ask the question, so what do you do with those 10%? But am I answering your question? Yeah, okay, good. So, good.
Hey Seth, we are embarking on a large-scale change effort here at EPA, building more unity across the agency, the 18,000 people we have, people working out in the labs, the regions, all across the country. And obviously EPA is in today's news and yesterday's news and will be in tomorrow's news as well. How do you know when you do large-scale change efforts and you consult with large organizations, how do you know when your work is done, when you have been successful? What does it look like? What is the organization doing right as it's understanding that it needs to go forward in a certain way? Certainly you've made those points already, but any advice you can give EPA as we look at how to build more unity, more collaboration, more of a sense of we're in this all together, all of us are in this together. So building a one EPA.
How do I know when my work is done?
When your work as a consultant is done.
Which is different than when your work as an employee is done.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
And I'm hearing maybe both of those questions in there. Is that right?
Please.
Yeah. So as a consultant,